Hey guys, my name is Lawson Deming. I am one of the owners of Barnstorm VFX. We're a VFX company who works mostly in television. We're based here in Los Angeles, in Burbank. We're here to talk about one of the shows that we worked on this season, which is The Man in the High Castle. If you guys have been following kind of the Blender community recently, you'll know that there's been some talk about it. We had our reel for that show that went online a few weeks ago. And there have been some stories about it on Blender Nation and just one that just came up the other day on Algorithmic's website. We worked very closely, David and I, and everybody at Theory and Barnstorm all worked together on the season, last season, the second season of the show. We did not really work on the first season except to do one sequence, but we did all the visual effects essentially for the second season. That's in the neighborhood of 400 visual effects shots. And basically all the 3D was done in Blender. None of our compositing was done in Blender. We used mostly Nuke, some After Effects, and we had a number of supplementary packages. We used Substance Painter for the texture painting. David Skies managed to figure out a way to get Massive sort of working in Blender, sort of. And we did some particle simulation stuff in Houdini. What else did we use, David?
We used Speed Tree. We used the Grove. We did, you mentioned Nuke. We used OptiTrack to track the motion capture data, and we can't leave out Deadline. ThinkBot's Deadline saved our ass.
Yes, Deadline. Barnstorm uses Shotgun as well for our shot tracking and our pipeline, and we kind of fit that together with Theory, which uses Make Theory. So we had a lot of things going on, but really Blender for all the 3D stuff, including the modeling and final rendering and cycles of everything. And so, David, I wasn't here at the very beginning. I know you guys already talked about some stuff. Did you focus mostly on the exterior of the Volkshalle?
Yeah, we did exterior. Ben did a cool presentation about it, and we figured we could leave the interior and any extra stuff to you.
Okay, great. And did you said you threatened to show the reel? Did you do it at any other point today?
I'm going to steal your thunder. That's all you.
Okay. I'm going to see if I can play back the reel then here.
I posted the link to the page on the YouTube live chat for everybody watching virtually.
Okay, great.
Yeah, that way they can see it in high res. Now, if you want to share your screen, I don't know if you're going to show any things that you want to show off. It's up to you.
Did I just play that without sharing my screen with anybody?
You did.
Oh, you should have said something.
I thought you guys weren't going to do it because of the bandwidth thing. So.
Oh, well, that could be a problem.
Yeah.
Let me play it one more time for everybody who didn't see it. I'm going to talk through it. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to play it without lower the audio. Okay, so sorry about this. Here. So all this stuff made in Blender, texture and substance meter, the interior of the Volkshalle. Interior and exterior of the Volkshalle, textured in substance painter, rendered in cycles, built all in Blender. This here in the background is a matte painting. It was mostly not done in Blender, the exterior, but this interior was fully done in Blender. The crowd simulation was originally done in Massive, and I'm going to explain how we ended up dealing with that. So we ended up building most of the crowd simulation in Nuke. And final compositing for most of this stuff was done in Nuke. With plates shot by me on location. I was the visual effects supervisor as well. This thing David has already talked about. It's mostly, I'm sure these guys talked about how many polygons we were pushing for this.
Billion.
And how painful it was. Trees in this done in speed tree so that we could add some motion to them. Some plate photography there. This structure that we're currently using in this shot was originally designed in the first season, but we did a pretty significant rebuild of it because we're seeing it much closer here than it was ever seen in the first season. All new texturing, all new lighting. It's never been seen at night before. This is mostly comport, though I believe the flag is a CG one. And then all these elements in the background of this shot I did in Blender and gave it to our new compositor. This is a photograph of the actual airport at Tempelhof that I took while I was in Berlin for the show. The airport's not in use, so it was completely empty. But then we projection mapped everything on. We brought in the planes. We also retextured completely from last season and rendered them again in cycles. This is a matte painting from a flashback to World War II. It doesn't have the final effect on it. It has sort of a green effect on it in the actual show. This matte painting was done by one of our matte painting artists, but the cars and pedestrians were done in Blender. This set extension, that explosion was Houdini. This nuclear bomb blast was done in Houdini, but the background for that, the kind of farm background was all done in Blender and rendered in cycles and computed.
And speed trees, right?
Those trees, I don't know if those were speed. Yes, they were speed tree. Yeah, I forgot. I brought some speed tree trees up for that. Okay. Apologies to people who did not see it before. How was that connection, David? Did it play back at a
good? Yeah, it worked. I think it's good. And like I said, I also posted the link for everybody who's watching live right now. You've got the high-res Wistia link.
Correct. And we also have it on our webpage, which is barnstormvfx.com. It's the second thing. It's the second thing down. Man, the High Castle VFX reel links to our Wistia. We've got the Good Fight title sequence. I'm not sure if anybody watches that show. That was not done in Blender. That was actually practically photographed. They directed and DP'd that sequence. But we actually did some concept work for it in Blender, which I may have around that I could have you guys take a look at here. And then our regular reel, which I won't show at this point. I'm going to maybe turn it over to Casey so she can show you guys. We have a blend for the Volkshalle, the interior of the Volkshalle. And Casey is our CGI lead at Barnstorm, and she was responsible for putting together a lot of the stuff that you see in there and making sure the layout was correct and figuring out the lighting, figuring out a lot of the kind of technical hurdles that we ran into while trying to push as many polygons in as big a sequence. One thing I will say before I hand it over is if you look at the way that the Volkshalle is constructed, I'm just going to roll forward to this. It's this giant space with essentially one oculus in the ceiling through which the majority of light comes into the room. And anybody who's tried to render 3D stuff, even with the portal lights and stuff like that, will know that that's a huge pain in the butt. To do a scene that involves essentially one light source from above. We ended up having, we were talking about this, the new kind of filmic thing for Blender, and we used a sort of an early version of that. We rendered everything out as EXRs, and that's going to be linear color space anyway, but it's helpful to be able to look at things, based on the kind of lighting that we're matching stuff to, which is oftentimes stuff shot on Alexa, shot in a log color space. And so we try to light our scenes, to have essentially as high a dynamic range as they can based on what they would be in real life, and then essentially do our camera work in post. And that meant that in a shot like this, or the one that comes before it, and some various others, we had a skybox up above shooting through this tiny little oculus, which here's the opening of it. You can see we're sort of cheating it because really no light would be able to come through that, or very little. But essentially the top of the dome here was our light source, and you see it at the head of the shot here. Our light up there, I think Casey and I were talking about how bright it ended up being. It was a giant area light. It was something like 75 million units of brightness. And we had more than one of them because we had the kind of the general one, and then we had the lighting coming down through at a direct angle. And we found that there were reasons why we didn't end up using just directional lights for it, which I don't think we need to talk about. Oh, look at that little thing there.
We should also mention that we brought on Lucas Stockner to help out. That's one thing that we don't really talk about too much, but to write some code to help handle all the lights in the scene and make these scenes actually render. That ultimately became Light Scrambling, that's now coming out for Blender. Yeah. We've got one question before you hand it off from Brian Craig, asking why Nuke over After Effects, and could Blender's compositing get to Nuke's level?
The reason we use Nuke is because, and Casey can talk about this a little better too, we use a workflow out of Blender that involves multi-layer EXRs, a lot of passes, and we do essentially, the passes that Blender wants to spit out are diff color, diff direct, diff indirect, gloss color, gloss direct, gloss indirect, and then transparent of those same channels, and then emissive and other things. I created a custom gizmo in Nuke for mixing those together and kind of color correcting them all separately. That also involves some, and they're not very often used, but we have some relighting tools that use position pass and normal world normals to do stuff like that. After Effects, frankly, is really terrible with multi-layer EXRs. It's got a few tools, including something called Extractor, but you end up making these really gnarly pre-comps and pre-comps within pre-comps within pre-comps. And my kind of rule of thumb in After Effects is that if you are making pre-comps and you don't know what to name them because you're just making them because you need a pre-comp for something in After Effects to work, you got to switch over to Nuke. Incredibly difficult comps tend to be much easier to deal with in Nuke, and we use After Effects because even with Nuke Studio, Nuke doesn't really have a very strong timeline features, in my opinion. And we just never, we were using After Effects and Nuke kind of before we were using Blender, so we didn't really think about Blender's kind of comp features. We do a ton of fairly advanced keying and really heavily lean on the fact that Nuke has basically all the keying suites in it, everything from Keylight to Plymat to its own. It has a IBK keyer, which is very powerful, and it's just we just don't use Blender for keying and kind of for that reason for comp. Does that answer that question?
I think so.
I'm not against doing it, but when I made that, that giant list of softwares that included, Massive and Speed Tree and Houdini and all these other things, like we use in a production environment where, I'll give you an example. We have a situation where we're currently working on Silicon Valley, the 4th season of Silicon Valley. We've worked on it since the beginning. And, we had a situation come up basically where they delivered a show to us that they needed the visual effects and mostly monitor burn-ins and stuff like that, but they needed it in a matter of days. And so we had the delivery of the effects to us essentially on Wednesday night. We started them Thursday morning, and by Thursday night we had 30 shots complete. So we did 30 shots in a day of monitor burn-ins with planar tracking and element creation. And that's just a handful of people essentially producing that. And, movies tend to have a long lead time to finish stuff. Television, not so much. I'm sure Sean will corroborate that, where you have to figure stuff out and you have to get it out there. And for us, it's, what's the package that works? And in a lot of cases, that's Blender for 3D stuff. And but we're not precious about it. If we get something that works, we use whatever's fastest and whatever's best. And I think it says something that among Houdini, Nuke, After Effects, Massive, Speed Tree, etc., we are using Blender at the center of our 3D pipeline.
It's the middle piece.
Yeah. So I'm going to hand it over to Casey, and we are going to attempt to open this Volkshalle blend. I'll do that first in case anything happens. I'm not using the newest version. I'm outed. I'm only on regular 278. Okay.
Okay. I just want to talk a little bit about kind of the start to finish process on this. I don't know how much time we have, so we'll kind of flow through it here. Okay, so obviously we use a ton of scene layers here because as we go into Nuke, we're rendering all these EXR layers, and we try to set the render layers up in a pretty modular way so that if we have to do any re-renders, we're not spending days trying to get the whole thing rendered. Also touching on the Nuke thing, I want to say that we heavily leveraged Nuke's projection system to do these interior shots specifically so that we would only have to do single frame renders of the actual Volkshalle itself, because those took a tremendously long time. Some of these renders were 8K or above, and they would take like 48 to 72 hours to render. And that's
the show finishes in 4K, and we had to super sample.
Yeah, the show finishes in 4K, and to get a nice clean finish, we did super sample it, sometimes up to 8K or higher. So we were really battling render times, and it really helped to be able to leverage Nuke's projection system so that we would only have to do that once, or however many times we had light groups set up. So the process began with modeling. We had received a season 1 asset, but I think it was from Rhino and is heavily triangulated. So we ended up eventually just remodeling the whole thing, and that was Theory Animation helped us tremendously with that. They did a lot of the modeling work on this, and the scene ended up being fairly massive. It was, I want to say, in the neighborhood of 50 million polys or something. And we had, at the very end of it, about 650 textures feeding into everything. So that was kind of the modeling process. Texturing, we used partial cycles materials and partial substance. We have developed an internal substance node that was actually Lawson's doing, where we can export from Substance Painter the PBR metal rough maps, plug those in, and maybe do a little bit of color modification if we need it. And they look pretty great in Blender. We don't have to do too much to them beyond that. So we really leverage that with this because Substance Painter, it's easy to get something that looks really great out of it. So, personally, I would recommend it, even if you're using Blender, even if it's not, a simple plug-in thing where you bring it back and forth. So that was kind of the process for texturing. We had to really make sure that our glossy materials were optimized as much as we could because this was such a large interior space in which light was only coming in from the top, or in the case of our 210 episode with the crowd simulation, we had a lot of firelight. So we were running into a lot of problems with fireflies and stuff. We ended up doing some very minimal clamping and also using Lucas Stockner's scrambler, which David might be able to talk a little more about in depth later because I'm not super sure of the technical details, but it really helped clean up a lot of those dark areas in the renders we were doing.
You want to fly it?
You've got till 30 after, so I think 12:30. So you've got time, so no need to rush too much.
You want to fly it to the roof and show what these...
Sure. I have a question.
Yes.
So who designed the content?
Who designed this structure
Yeah.
originally?
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm gonna jump in here for this so that everybody can hear. You can keep working here. So just so that they can hear me. So the Volkshalle is actually a building that was really supposed to be constructed. It was designed by Hitler's architect Albert Speer, and we actually used photographic reference of physical models that they had constructed. That are on display somewhere now. I wasn't able to see them when I was in Berlin. The production designers team built the original look of the Volkshalle based very closely on the things that we have from Albert Speer.
Did they create the assets to use right to you?
Yes to both. They had created an original asset in Rhino, which is what art departments like stuff with vectors. And they created an asset in Rhino that we originally kind of rebuilt over it. And then at a certain point in the production process, we realized that the model that they had based their model on was, like this tiny scale model that didn't have any details in it. And there had been a big debate about, we don't want to divert from what Speer would have intended. But at the same time, we had a bunch of illustrations of the outside of the Volkshalle, and only one image of the inside. And I think we could actually find that here.
Yeah, I've got those images I can share. Let's have them there too.
Oh, of course, I'm not going to be able to see.
And while you're looking for that, I can kind of chime in a little bit about the Albert Speer thing.
Yeah.
That image that we have from Albert Speer was the one and only mock-up. So a lot of design decisions were based on a mock-up that was really made for cheap at the time back in the 40s. So we ended up studying things like the Roman Colosseum, the Parthenon, Parthenon, also looking at giant stadiums around the world and understanding kind of the design language that Albert Speer had. And in a little bit further study in his books, we ended up seeing a lot of different relationships of the ways he had different triangles and different giant square marble slats that filled the top of the dome, and as they went smaller and smaller down. So we really dove deeply into the design and the structure of the whole thing. That's how we ended up making it feel pretty real.
So if you just search for Volkshalle, you will see that there are a number of images of the exterior. And these are scale models that were built. There's not very much of the interior. Oh, look, there's a picture of it right there. Look at that.
And around the same time, there was also a video game that came out that had the Volkshalle.
Yeah, that's this
that
one
was
here.
Wolfenstein, the New Order.
Okay. And for those wondering, we ended up completely replacing the Rhino model.
Click on what?
No, originally we were trying to use the model because it was cleared by art department. But we just got to a point where it just wasn't working. There wasn't enough detail. The model was kind of sketchy in some places because it was straight out of Rhino from vectors and stuff. So we just ended up rebuilding it.
Right. So this is the only actual image that exists of what the interior of the Volkshalle was supposed to look like. It was photo mock-up, including some people, and then this model. And the interior, you can sort of look like the Pantheon. But this is all there was, and it was very simplified. If you actually look more closely at it, you realize that it's missing all kinds of things that it probably should have had in it. And that was kind of the debate originally was, what was the intent essentially? What was the architect's intent in building this? And would he have built something more advanced than that to show off the interior in the same way they had designed stuff for the exterior? because they're very big models of the exterior, but there's only the one tiny little model of the interior. See, there's one of the models of the exterior. But so we made a change at some point here where we not only did we not use the art department model, but eventually we actually completely took some artistic license and rebuilt a lot of the things in it to be different than what they were. We added certain details. We changed the way that certain things are viewed.
I've also got some of the concept art here if you want me to show that too. So this was one of the pieces from the art department.
Right, and that was built on top of our model, actually. So we had already constructed at that point the model, and this was them, basically filling it in with some lighting that they painted in, and with some kind of standees of characters. This would actually be an interesting time to talk about how we ended up doing the crowd simulation, and I think Casey knows a little bit more about this than I do. But basically what we did is we spent all season basically knowing that we had to do this big thing and thinking we were going to do it in massive. And to a certain extent, we did do it in massive. But what we did is David ended up recording a motion capture session where we got people to do Sieg Heils, among other things. There's no stock motion capture of Sieg Heiling, unfortunately.
We will.
And we brought that in, and we were talking about, how do we do capture? How do we put 150,000 people inside this space? Because that's basically what it was, 150,000 plus people. We were like, well, we can't just use photographic images because there's a bunch of torches and braziers and varied lighting. We can't just shoot everyone in front of a blue screen normally and have that work. We sort of could for the guys down on the ground, and you can see in our reel that there were
let me actually pull that up
some
here.
Photographic elements. For the majority of the crowd, we knew we were going to need to use CGI people, and so we recorded a bunch of people. We animated that motion capture data originally in massive, and we were talking about, well, do we do groups of people? Do we try and render everybody? This is a situation where we were talking about, Casey said, it took days to render a single frame of this space when you split it out because of the resolution and lighting and other things. And so we couldn't render thousands of frames of hundreds of thousands of people. So we came up with this interesting system, and this is something that we were able to get away with doing in Nuke, and this is an example of kind of mixing Blender and Nuke. We did a particle system. We recorded all of our digital doubles with different lighting setups. So we would have, we'd have them lit from an ambient lighting from the top. We had backlighting, and then we had fire lighting from the left and fire lighting from the right. Is that correct, Casey?
Yeah, and then we had those as kind of separate light group passes that we could then add over each other in Nuke to have control over the gamma and gain of each lighting source.
So essentially, we basically baked out renders of the characters lit from all the directions they could be lit from. And then we took a particle system, which came to Blender through Houdini and then Blender, or Blender and then Houdini, and then Nuke. And so we had a particle position for every single person. So everyone in the stands, for example, has got a particle, is a particle. And they then are a random array of sprites in Nuke that feed in all of the possible lighting conditions that they could be in. And then if you pause it again right there, David, actually go back to go to the big wide shot of the crowd of Himmler, Sieg Heiling.
This one right here?
No, further back, the one where Smith first walks out.
Smith walks out, got it.
Okay, right here. Okay, yeah, so go to where the full view of the crowd and stop it right there. Okay, so for example, if you look at basically all the people, you have, lighting sources. It's a great color to see. What's this? You have lighting sources basically all along here, and then you can see that there is light hitting characters from this side and then from this here. The characters in the back are the ones that are the most strongly lit. Basically, everyone is lit for being in every possible position. And then essentially what we created is a heat map pass, which is just like, what's the fall off of all these lights? And then use that heat map pass to drive the mixing of the different render light group layers of each thing. So if someone was standing right to the right of a large light source, it would bias which, it would feed like maximum lit from the right, essentially, into that sprite. And that's how we ended up doing the crowd. So this is this crazy mashup between Blender and Massive and Houdini and Nuke.
And Fuse. I actually just
and Fuse. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So here are some of the characters. Yeah. David's got it.
We ended up generating the characters out of Adobe's Fuse program, and then one of Theory's guys re-rigged them so that we could map massive data directly onto them, and then we would bring in those people individually into a Blender comp, set up their lighting system, apply whatever action Walter from doing our massive stuff and Juan doing our rig stuff had provided for us, so we could really pick any action that we needed for a given scene, apply it to the rig, and we were good to go for a render. And we would do an ortho sprite, a sprite sort of from a top angle and a sprite from a lower angle, so that we could feed in the correct one based on where the camera was in the shot.
So these are just some quick little demos of bad motion capture, but
this is the guy who's rubbing his belly. Yeah. We ended up having some trouble because for some reason everyone was always rubbing their belly.
I have to look for it, but one of the very first massive tests that we did, a guy just picked up a cell phone and started walking around. I don't think that happens. I'll see if I can find it for fun.
So a lot of and then a lot of complex lighting. David got mad at me for the amount of lights that I put into some of these scenes.
It's okay.
Well, I heard in the Render Man discussion something about 11 million lights.
As a render man.
Do that now.
Yeah, we barely scratched the surface.
Yeah, I know. We only had like 7,000 lights in that one.
Literally having a heart attack.
Can you do a video of Hein dancing?
There is a Hein dancing video. This is another test too, rendering 180,000 people in Blender. This brought Blender to its knees, and ultimately is why we ended up going with KC's solution. I can full screen this. This was not practical in any way to render out of Blender.
Yeah, I think there would have been a way to do it, but the trick with this is again, it's a TV show. We had a relatively long amount of time, to work on it total. But in terms of actual post on it, we only had a few months of post, I would say, for the entire season.
Yeah.
Probably 5 months maybe of post for 10 episodes.
Yeah, and then just is this it? Okay.
I like it.
Do you want to explain who this is?
This is one of the characters in the scene where the camera tilts down and we're walking. They walk away from the. It's the guy on the right in this shot, who's walking ahead of Smith. So we took the model, and that actually looks like Smith. It doesn't look like Hein. I'm sorry. I think that is Smith. That's Rufus.
Okay.
Letting us get down.
They just did this just for fun.
I mean, we really tried to sneak it in, but
man, that's a long animation sequence.
It's pretty serious. It's the one and only time it's ever going to see the light of day, so might as well let it go. All right, I think it's looping now.
Is there anything else you guys want to talk about this, or questions about, or from here, or are you guys going to move on? Yeah, Sean.
You said you rendered one frame basically and projected a new.
Yeah.
What did you project on?
We brought back in, I say, a simplified version of the geometry.
It was a retopoed version of the full resolution geometry.
And when we say a single frame, what we really mean is 5 different frames, because if the camera's moving, you need to see what's behind, what's being
So we
occluded.
merge matted those together and rendered out at the same time.
Yeah, hold on a second. Okay. So yes, we do have Barnstorm Visual Effects, www.barnstormvfx.com. You can look us up on Facebook, barnstormvfx.com, or Barnstorm VFX on Facebook, sorry. Yes, we're doing season 3 of High Castle. We're starting working on it very soon. Well, we're already starting working on it, and we are hiring. So there you go.
Cool. Well done, guys.
Thanks.
All right.
I'm going to mute us now.